Hello, everyone. This is Tim speaking, Tim Wilmot, and welcome to my demo and paint along experience for May 2020. Anyone who's been on my previous online workshops, and I know from the registrations, there's been quite a few of you that have been on previous sessions, you'll know the format. So I've chosen a subject to paint beforehand, and then over the next couple of hours or a little bit less, I will demonstrate my process to you, my painting process to you, and answer any questions you may have along the way. Also, as I go through, I will try and give as much commentary and description to what I'm doing. I think most of the people attending English is their first language, but I know, well, you would have seen from the chat window on the right-hand side, we've got people. It's lovely to see people from all over the world, and English may not be their first language, so I might need to just sort of speak a little bit slower and as clearly as I can. Now, this demo is being recorded, automatically recorded after the presentation. You will get an email, I think, from the Crowdcast system that I'm using today with a link to the recording. It will be the same link. The whole point about this system is that it's so easy. The link that you registered on, what you're looking at now, if you want to go back anytime, it's the same link. So just bookmark that, or just use the same link there. Also, a big part of this is that I want to see, I'd love to see your painting and share it with the watercolor community at large. So if you email me a photo of your completed painting, I will compile a short video and put it on my YouTube channel, Tim Wilmot, the YouTube channel. And I'll give you more information about that later on, but I will showcase a compilation of everyone that submitted their paintings and give a tiny little critique, something positive, maybe something on reflection, something that you might want to do better or improve on next time. Now, the audio part of this demo is one way only. Your microphone is on mute. Don't worry about any background noises, barking dogs, screaming kids. If you've got any questions, please click on the Ask a Question button, okay, down in the bottom of your screen there, and I'll do my best to answer those. I can see there's, let me see this. Oh, wow, there's 18 questions already. So just click on that button there, Ask a Question. And then as I reach certain stages of the painting process, I'll give out your first name and as you register with, and read out your question, try and answer as best I can. Now, if you've seen me paint before, and there's a few people that have been with me on workshops and previous online workshops, most of the time, I paint in about 4 stages. So there's the initial sketch, then there's the first wash, then the third stage is the darks, and then the details. So in between, there should be plenty of time to ask questions. So just a reminder, ideally, please use the Ask a Question button to ask anything and not the chat window on the right-hand side. With lots of messages in chat, it's going to be impossible for me to spot the questions. So thanks for understanding on that. So if I could just describe the rest of the interface that you've got here with the Crowdcast system. So you'll obviously have seen the chat window, pretty obvious. We've got a button down the bottom. Let me just see. It's sort of about there down below. There's a source photo button. So you'll be able to download this source photo. I did include it on a couple of the emails that went through there. So hopefully you've been able to, those that want to paint live. I find on these sessions that half the people half the attendees do paint live, and the other half are quite happy to sort of sit back and relax and do that in their own time. No problem at all. Whatever's your preference. So there's a source photo. There's the ask question button. There's a polls button as well. Just a little. Let me just have a look at that. There's a polls button, and yeah, I just asked whether you attending live right now, what level of painting are you at? Are you a beginner? So I would classify a beginner as maybe painting in the last, you've started painting in the last year or two with watercolors. It's always interesting. I was asked that question before, just to know my audience, and it looks like it's, well, slightly more on the sort of intermediate advanced side. I know some people attending. There's some brilliant artists that are attending, and you'll know who you are. And some of you that are fresh to this, I don't know what level you're at, but look, we're all in this together. It doesn't matter what level. It just the main thing is you get something out of it. A couple of hours enjoyment, maybe a distraction from the current pandemic that's affecting us all, and just a little bit of diversion there. And enjoy painting, enjoy watercolor painting. So that's the poll feature. Won't ask any more polls. Won't make it too daunting for you. So, right, the subject for this demo is the pretty town of Fivizzano in Tuscany, in Italy. I'll try and choose different locations and types of subjects on every demo I do. So all of them hopefully will be subtly different in different locations. So this is Fivizzano. Look it up on the web. Now, this is a place I've visited a few times personally. This is my own photograph. I visited there a few times. This is a location. I'm a tutor on a week's painting holiday with the Watermill. If you look them up on the web, watermill.net, and it's a UK company that run this lovely mill in Tuscany, beautiful countryside, high up in the mountains, and every day we go out painting in different locations. And this is the nearest town to them, Fivizzano, and we go there on market day, which I think is a Tuesday. And in the morning there's the market, and we paint a market scene, and in the afternoon I take people up to this square in the top part of the village, and it's a sort of square. It's a tiny little area. There's this cafe bar here. Behind us to the right is a lovely little ice cream shop. Behind us to the left is another coffee shop restaurant. Over to the left here, there's a lovely tree. More on that in my composition discussion in a minute. But here we're looking at the a little bar restaurant. And why this scene? So in watercolor, I always look for big areas of contrast. So things that are very light and also very dark, so that we've got those contrasts, and maybe a light area right up against a dark area could be, for me, quite pleasing from a watercolor point of view. We're also painting almost contre-jour, against the light. So that is also good from a watercolor point of view, because we get those different contrasts, we get shapes, silhouetted, tables and chairs, for example, people, objects in the way, a tree here. So that can be quite interesting as well, going contre-jour against the light. From a composition point of view, it's a lot of the photographs I take, when I look back at them, I think they're not really suitable for painting. They might have been a half decent photograph. I'm not a particularly good photographer, but I do take, when I go and visit a place, I might take lots of photographs mainly on my phone these days. So they might be sort of low resolution, and compile a lot of them. And I say most of them would be unsuitable for watercolor painting based on some of the things I mentioned already. The direction of the shadows, the basic elements of the composition, the areas of contrast, the subject matter may be quite difficult from a watercolor point of view as well. But this one I think is all right. And well, it's nearly there. And so when I look at a scene, I want to double check and make sure it's suitable from a composition point of view. It's got a good balance about it. And I like this area here, all right? I particularly like this little shard of light. Do you see here, hitting this shop blind, and these lovely stripes as well. And then we've got the vertical part of the little trim, the front trim bit of the blind as well. But that lovely little bit of light there, then dark below that. This tree, we're looking through the canopy, lovely bright lime green. When I visit Fivizzano, it's October, so it's pretty good actually. The trees are still quite green. They're just beginning to get their autumn color. You can see some of them that are turning a little bit yellow, but let's imagine it's a summer scene. So light there, light here, obviously, maybe a little bit darker coming towards the left-hand side. Bits of light hitting the rooftops. There's a couple of figures in the cafe, a little bit of light around those as well. So we want to try and pick up on that, some figures in the cafe. So we will be in a loose way, and I paint in a loose style. We'll be painting and rendering this cafe with the tables and legs of the chairs, and look how they're connecting to the shadow of that tree there. And so these shadows, they're sort of almost horizontal, but as we come towards the foreground, they're going to radiate a little bit more towards us. So if there was something there, the shadow of that is going to be almost like that. Okay, so just think about that perspective. As regards that perspective, there's not too many difficult things. We've got a slight angle. So in my mind, I am now mentally painting, drawing this scene and thinking about these angles. Is it horizontal? Is it vertical? Is it a slight angle? What angle is it? So that might be kind of 10 degrees off the horizontal. We've got a bit steeper angle there. Okay. Going back to composition, there's a lot of things happening on the right-hand side, which might be all right, but I'm thinking, let's have something on the left-hand side. And in fact, if I can just introduce a preliminary painting I did as a practice for this event. So here we go. So this is what we're going to try and achieve, something like this. And I've kept true to the original scene. So I've got that, the first thing that attracted me to the scene was that little triangle, a little slim triangle of light hitting the shop blind, the cafe blind there. And we got the big tree with the light shining through it, a few people in the cafe, these random shadows. I mean, if you try and look at all of these shadows and try and replicate those, it would drive you potty, honestly. You've just got to go in a kind of loose way and give the impression of those shadows. But a big thing on the left-hand side, I happen to know as a visitor, as a fairly regular visitor here, there's a lovely tree sat in this little raised bit here. If we were to nudge a little bit over to the left, we would see this lovely large mature tree. So I've taken the liberty of moving it slightly over to the right and then having this in the top left corner, we're framing that left-hand side. So getting in some foliage coming down into the scene, and kind of, well, as I say, just framing that scene, and then to mimic that, to reflect that, we've got the bit of shadow coming across the foreground. I've got to think, well, the sun's coming at this angle, so maybe those, on the next time around, those leaves maybe should be a little bit further over to the right, so they're casting this shadow, okay, in that sort of angle. And then have a couple of figures. The figures are connecting the foreground shadow to the middle ground. I'm thinking about connecting different elements here, all these different objects, rather than having the tree on its own. It's connected with the background cafe. The figures are connecting the shadows in the middle there with the shadows back in the sort of recess of that cafe. Yeah, so we want to think about connecting those different objects as well. All right, so that's the plan. There's the source photo. Click on your source photo button there. Download that to your, if you want to do this live right now or do it later on, whatever you want to do. Materials. So paper, use good quality watercolor paper. I'm using Saunders Waterford today, but honestly, there's so many good makes out there, depending on your location. It could be Arches, Fabriano. There's a dozen well-known brands out there, but watercolor paper. So this is cotton-based paper, and it's a medium texture. So you get paper in different surfaces. There's hot, smooth. There's rough, obviously self-explanatory. And then in the middle, there's cold press or NOT, not. I'm using the middle one. Pencil to do the outline sketch is going to be, my preference is a soft pencil, 2B or 3B. Brushes, the three main brushes I'm going to be using are these. So let me take you through this. First, to do the big wash, or the first wash, is a big mop brush. This is a Raphael. This is a synthetic imitation squirrel, where you could use, honestly, there's so many different mop brushes. This is a Rosemary one. Escoda do them, Princeton do them. So big mop brush, and this brush has got a good edge. Do you see that? See how sharp that edge is? We need that to be able to paint around different objects. Second brush is a smaller mop brush. This is a natural one. This again, like all mop brushes, good water retaining capability. It's got a good edge and it's got a good point. We will need that to do a little bit of detail painting around shadows, creating the shadows, again, painting around a few objects. We need a good edge and a good point. All right, that's brush number 2. Brush number 3, a smaller detail brush. This is a synthetic brush, again, with a good point. There are 2 miscellaneous brushes I will be using for the foliage. There's a dagger brush, shaped like a dagger or a sword. Again, quite good water retaining capability, but very long hairs and a very good point. And it's great for doing lines and little posts or rope on a nautical scene. But it is very good also for doing foliage. I'll elaborate on that when I go through my foliage routine. And then just a small synthetic round brush. Doesn't have a good point. It's kind of fairly flat, this one, but this is good for doing foliage in a second technique. Again, I'll describe that when I go through that. Paints, not a massive palette. I would, in fact, I'm seriously thinking about reducing my colors down to about 6 or 8, but I've got quite a few here. So neutral tint, we've got burnt umber, we've got burnt sienna, yellow ochre. This is viridian green, cobalt green, and then the cerulean blue, cobalt blue, ultramarine blue, and alizarin crimson, a light red. This is a Windsor red, a light red, and so that's a bright red, a light red, and then cadmium orange and cadmium yellow. All right, so those are the main colors there. Right, and then over to the right-hand side is my water, clean bucket of water, and a sponge. So there we are. What I'll do is, I don't think that there's quite a few questions coming through, but I will use the first, I will answer the questions first of all in my first little break. So first step is the outline sketch, all right? Getting in the main objects. And then when I've done that, I'll answer a few of your questions. So follow me on this one, or just sit back and relax, whatever is your preference. But here we go, into the painting proper. And the most difficult thing to think about is where to start. You may start with a key focal point. I've done that sometimes. So it might have been that slither of light. It might be the people in the cafe. It might be the people on the left-hand side. Invariably, for me, this is my own preference, I start in the top left corner. And as I said before, I'm trying to imagine the scene in front of me, almost on the paper, and I'm kind of tracing those lines on the paper to make it easier for me. So I'm trying to imagine that. The other objects I wanted to point out to you, I forgot to mention, on the little veranda here, on the little balcony, there's some red flowers, little red pelargoniums or geraniums, however they're called, but they're catching the light there. And that's quite nice, just evocative of many of the balconies in the town with the flowers out there, a little bit of autumn color. Right, so let's get started and think about the outline drawing. And I'm drawing in a landscape orientation rather than portrait, okay? Another important point, very often your paper will be rectangular. Are you going to go portrait or landscape? Quite obviously with this one, it's pretty obvious that you're going to go landscape. Right. So there's two buildings in the back. Well, there's actually 3 buildings in the background, starting with the left-hand one, sort of coming down like that. Now, you don't need to be too precise with these lines. Notice there, that was not a straight line. It's a little bit quirky. These are old buildings. Maybe to give the impression of these old buildings, we don't want to be too precise with the lines. And also, the transition from the sky to the roof, I want that to be a kind of soft edge. So I don't want there to be too many unnecessary pencil lines showing through the finished painting. So back on down to the middle building, the actual cafe itself, all right? And there's a bit of a tree or whatever behind there. And then we've got the main tree itself. Now, I'm not being very precise with the drawing of this tree. I'm just really getting in the main shape. It's sort of like a ball, but don't make it too perfect. Make it a little bit asymmetrical or some bits jutting out of the canopy, just so it looks a little bit more natural. And then up the right-hand side, at a slightly steeper angle, we've got the other side of this square, where the building's actually down there. The road leads down to the middle part of town. Now, we've got the tree canopy going over to this building here. We've got the right-hand edge of the cafe there. Just excuse me. And let's get in the shop blind. Now, the actual top of the shop blind is almost horizontal. So look for those clues in the drawing. And then as we come down, so the angle is like that. As we come down, it's going to get to the horizontal, almost at eye level, and then a little bit, just a slight angle going up as we come down to street level. All right, blind. Obviously, the front trim of the blind, like that. And then street level. And up to the left-hand side, we've got the balcony of the left-hand building. There's those planters sitting on the railings. So they'll be all red, okay? We've got the round little raised grassy bit, which will be in the shade there. We've got some, I'll come on to people in a minute. Let's just continue on the right-hand side. Tree. Now, I'm not actually going to draw in too many details of things that are on the right-hand side. I don't want too much detail on the sides of the picture, on the peripheral. I want there to be the main focal point in this area here, okay? So the main objects will be in there. Nothing slap bang in the middle. Things just off to the right, off to the left, okay? So it's all dark under there, and just really a random shape of lights and darks that you see in there. Don't look at the picture too much. The more you look at the picture, the more details you're going to see, and you'll be getting the danger then is you're going to get tighter in your rendition of the picture. Sometimes what I do is look at a scene or look at a photograph for 1 minute and then remove the photograph and then go back to the painting and do it from memory. See if that works for you. Right, so shadows. Talking about the angle of those shadows coming around in a sort of radial pattern from different objects that are up here. There's a fountain here. I think there's a statue. There's some planters as well, but we don't need to be concerned too much with their detail. We want a sort of radial pattern like that. Again, that'd be quite pleasing to the eye, having that radial pattern. Now, figures, tables and chairs in here. So let's get in a few little figures, seated figures. If you're not used to painting in or drawing figures, these are going to be dead simple because there's just a head, there's some shoulders, and then the body like that. Very simple tabletop. And I'm just going to have a couple of figures there. for the cafe. I might also crosshatch where someone's face will be. Could have that one in light. That might be quite nice, having a light figure against a dark background. So imagine all of this is dark. All that's dark, but that's light. Might be a little bit of a focal point. So maybe have one of those two figures. Maybe they've got a white top, a lighter top, just throws up a little bit of contrast to the darker background. Okay, coming over to the left, let's have a couple of figures looking down on the scene. So that's figure number one there. And then maybe we'll have another figure at a slightly different pose. Not make them look as they're too awkward, but something like that. May put in their arms as well, but that will be that fourth figure there. I try and make these lines a little bit darker so they kind of show up a bit more on your screen. So just getting in the main shapes of those figures and defining where their legs will be there. All right. And connecting, as I say, connecting the background, the middle ground there to the foreground. Over on the left-hand side, I don't want to get bogged down too much detail, but there is a sort of shot that's got it's got a little bit of its blind coming down like that. We've got two windows on the middle cafe above the blinds. There's some kind of structure on top of the roof of the left-hand building. Looks like it could be some kind of solar heating or solar panels or something like that. Let's imagine there's a chimney up here casting a shadow. So you can make up these things as well. You can move chimneys around just to suit the composition a little bit better. I'll not draw them in, but there are a few vertical drain pipes as well. Now I am missing out let me just show it to you. Let's go back to the original photo. I'm missing out this parasol here. For me, it doesn't do anything. It's got one of these sort of cantilever arms to support it. It's a massive thing that comes out there. It's been folded up now. I'm not going to bother including that. Just imagine, for me, that's my preference not to include that. The other thing that possibly might work here, I mentioned this tree coming over in the top left corner and shadows coming across the foreground. Something else that might work here is maybe some sort of a parasol or umbrella. Maybe there's some more people sat over on the left-hand side, that there could be another group in there, okay? So there we are. That's the initial drawing done. Before I go on to the first wash stage, my second stage is to cover the whole painting, apart from those areas that are deliberately going to be kept really bright or white. All right, so I'm going to cover everything. I know some people might do things in stages. They'll do elements of the painting in stages. They'll do the sky first, then the middle ground, then the foreground. So that's not me. I'm going to be doing the wash, covering up the whole paper first. So let me answer some questions for you. So first question, this was from Amber. How do you decide what to paint? I love cityscapes and scenes, but never know where to find references. I'm often overwhelmed by the geometry and perspectives in some of them. Well, it's a good place to start. There are some people on this workshop. They love city scenes. They're quite good from a point of view. If you're looking down a street, you've got a left and a right, and you've got perspective. You're going to have to practice perspective. I like cityscapes. If you see some of my stuff up on my website, timwilmot.com, you'll see plenty of cityscapes up there. We will be including those on future workshops. That answers your question, Amber. Ravi, is there a problem using Prussian blue? Does it create mud? Ravi, I don't know. I just stick to my colors. I can't really comment on that blue. I know it's a sort of I think it's a staining color. So I think with any color, the more colors you've got, the more likely you are to get mud, in my impression, in my experience. So I don't really know about Prussian blue. The thing is, stick to good quality paints, good quality paper. Don't overwork things. You should avoid the mud. Let's answer a few more. Do you paint? So this is Jason. Do you paint on an incline? This is a slight 10%. So yeah, it is a slight incline. And then Anna, is this workshop? Let me just read this. Yes, so this is a virtual workshop. Anna, let's do Edward's question. I don't have cadmium yellow. I do have Quinn Gold, Hansa Med, and Iolian. Will any of these be okay? Yes, they will. They sound like pretty good warm colors to me. Okay. Anna's saying Prussian blue is transparent, so shouldn't create mud. It's a lovely, more subtle green blue than phthalo. Okay, thanks very much, Anna. Let's do one more question from Amber. How do you decide how much detail to include, what to leave out? I'm assuming this is part of the creating composition, but it's such a strong subject that I feel I need to focus on it. Yeah, so it's going to come to practice. You don't want the more you include in your composition, the tighter you're going to be. Sometimes just implying an object could be better than drawing it in a sort of tight, detailed way. Think about the composition as well. Don't have things on the left-hand side, the right, too dear on the left or right-hand side. Don't have part of the car showing or part of a figure showing. Don't copy a photograph 100%. Just think about that composition and do a practice sketch first of all. Right, I'll come back to some of those other questions later on. Right, next step, the first wash. All right. So as I say, I'm going to cover the whole paper. I'm going to start from the top, work my way down the bottom, getting in the main areas of covering the main areas of the painting. And some of the areas I'm painting will not be painted again. The sky, some of the rooftops, the street here, the square here, some of the tree. This will be the end color. They won't be tampered with again. Right. For the wash, big mop brush. This is a Raphael Soft Aqua size 6. It can be, honestly, you can use any brush you want to. Well, any big mop brush that you want to. That's a Rosemary size 10. What else have I got? There's an Escoda Ultimo Barcelona size 18. That'd be similar to that one. All right. So wet the brush, and I've got 3 mixing wells here. Generally, I'll mix the cools in here, darks in the top one, and warms in the bottom bit. This is a Holbein metal palette, enamel palette. So let's just mix up a blue first of all. The sky. It's going to be more intense here because the sun's coming from the right-hand side, the sky will be lighter here, and then as we come over, it's going to be darker, more intense. So we can start on the right-hand side. I'm going over my masking tape. I'm coming down over the rooftops. As I'm going over, I'm mixing more of the color. So I'm going a bit darker. And it doesn't really matter the direction of my strokes here. There are some people that would do a wash from left to right and go in that way, but it doesn't really matter. I'm just wanting to cover the whole scene, whole sky there. Now, coming down into the buildings, changing this to a warmer color, little bit of light red, my winds are red, and starting from the left-hand side, just following the line of the rooftop, I'm going to get a soft edge there. And then down to the building, the cafe. Come down over the scene, halfway down the building. It doesn't really matter what this color is, as long as it's a base color. It's like an undercoat. If we were decorating our walls, we're just sort of getting in an undercoat here. So I'm keeping it fairly warm, all right? Down to, over these figures, down to the street level. Let's go around this figure. Let's have that one unpainted. We go over that one. And then over to the right-hand side. Now, I've painted over the outline of the tree. I'm now going to do the tree with a thicker consistency than the sky, okay? And we're doing a little bit of wet in wets here, but I don't want to sort of create any blooms as such. So I'm making it thicker, and I'm making up my sort of like a yellowy green. So my bright yellow, it can be any yellow. I know you've got different yellows, but thicker, any blue. I'm using cobalt blue. And then go into the sky, sort of loosely following the outline I drew. Don't make it too watery. I was going a little bit too watery there, so mix in more pigment, okay? And too dark, a bit more yellow. Come over into the cafe, and then down to, don't overdo it, down to street level. Now, when we come down to the street level, it's still a warm color, but I see there's a little bit of coolness in it, a little bit of a blue. So I'm going to mix up a sort of little bit of alizarin crimson. Make sure it's not too green. a little bit of alizarin crimson. And as I come over, I'm going to go darker and a little bit cooler. So mix in a little bit of ultramarine blue with that alizarin crimson. And really, I'm sort of dabbing my paint on the paper, not really doing any neat and tidy lines, but I want there to be light here and darker to the left. Don't worry too much about any marks showing. They can be made into things if you've gone a little bit too darker in some areas, or you've left out a little bit of the paper. Don't worry. Be careful not to go back into the painting as it's drying, because you might end up it looking a little bit overworked. We want to try and keep it fresh. This area up here is drying. My room is not very humid right now. That's drying quite quickly. Down here, it's still wet. If I want to try and make this a little bit lighter down here, with that same brush, that damp brush, I can be doing a little bit of lifting out. Just a little bit. Okay. And then mop it on my sponge to the right, dip the brush in some clean water, squeeze out any excess moisture from the brush, and then with this damp brush, I can lift out again. Do you see it's getting lighter? And that is probably about it. Oh, I want to put in some red pelargoniums. This is my bright red here. Still a little bit damp in there. There we are. Just an impression of some little pelargoniums. We'll be going a lot darker around those, so it looks very untidy at the moment. But just really following the top of that, the railings of the balcony. Right. So that is it. As I say, covering the whole paper, lighter that side, darker over to the left, covering the whole paper, maybe leaving a few little areas. Doesn't matter if I've got some little areas here that are unpainted. There's a few here, one there, one there, one there. Totally accidental. Something on the table here. We could make that into a coffee pot or something like that, catching the light. So don't be overly concerned with covering everything. These little light marks can be made into something later on. All right, so that is step number 2. All right, so let me just answer any more questions that you've got. So question from Edward, do you ever use an eraser during the sketch phase? Yes, I do. In fact, I've got 2 here ready. They are sort of triangular and one with quite a good point to it. So yes, that drawing stage needs to be perfect before I go on to the painting, because it could be very difficult if I am painting around these shapes. If I got the perspective wrong, I got the figures in the wrong place, it would be very difficult to rectify that on the painting stage. Right, question from Eileen. Is there a larger photo painting of the scene we can look at to make a sketch first? Well, the photo that I sent you, it's a fairly high resolution photo, so you can make that as large as you want to on your screen. You shouldn't lose any of the detail on that, Eileen. So next question from Jake. Okay, thanks, Jake. Hopefully you've managed to get into the session here. Okay. Question from Beatrice. I don't have neutral tint, nowhere to buy in Mexico City. Which is the less awful substitute? You could use a Payne's Grey. You could even use a black. Another combination of colors is you could use an alizarin crimson, a dark blue, and a brown. Well, I've got a burnt sienna and burnt umber. So could use those three. Maybe 50% blue, and then 25% alizarin crimson, 25% of brown. Mix them together. That could be quite a dark, interesting color there. David, do you have an assistant to help you doing the video tutorials? I tried a simple one using my mobile video and found it really difficult to video paint and talk. This was just to a family member, so not competition. Well, David, you just need to get your camera on a tripod, really, rather than having someone else holding it for you. That would be a lot better. Question from Lillian. Would you rank according to importance in getting the best quality of 1 paint, 2 brush, 3 paper? That's a very good question. I would say probably paper comes first, then brushes. No, paper first, then paint, then brushes. Yeah, paper most important, paint second importance, brushes third. I've got some really cheap brushes. This one was about €0.50, $1. This one was about, again, $0.50, €1, cheap brushes found in a sale. The most important thing is the paper, though. Linda, is the video available after session? Yes, it is. Same URL. Jason, can you talk about how much water you use, especially on the first wash? What do you think about pre-wetting the paper? So pre-wetting the paper, I don't normally do. I do sometimes if I do want a really soft edge to it. Something I did, let me just see if I can find one for you where I would have pre-wetted the paper. Do I have it here? So I'm rooting through all my previous paintings. There we are. Here's one. That whole scene was pre-wetted. And then as it was damp, I went in with a darker color, all right, with a mop brush. And we get that soft edge forming, all right? So that's pre-wetting. The ratio of water to pigment, it comes with practice. Generally, as I go through the painting, I will be having more paint to water. The first painting stage, the wash, very watery, very weak, okay? But it does come with practice. Daniela, how do you choose your colors? I've just stuck these colors. I've stuck with my whole life, really. There's a temptation to buy the latest colors that are marketed to you. You get on a mailing list for Daniel Smith or Winsor & Newton. They bring out a new color, maybe promoting some artist. I just stick to my main colors and say, I would probably, my travel palette is this. Generally, I would have 3 colors: any red, any yellow, any blue, neutral tint. There are some miscellaneous colors, but keep to those. So that's that on that one. Thanks, Daniela. Let's do one. Is this drying nicely? Yes, it is. It's all right. Just I got to make sure this is dry before I go on to the next stage. So it's a good time to answer questions. Which scene, so this is from Drawing Talk John, that's a nice name. Which scene is suitable for watercolor painting? So I think I covered that in the start, where you've got silhouetted shapes, negative shapes, high areas of contrast, maybe a simple scene as well. They would normally be quite suitable. We just flick through these. Alex from France, what thickness paper do you prefer? This is 300 grams, Alex, or 140 pounds. So it's on the lighter side. You can get a lot heavier than that. Let's do one more question before I go on to the next step, which will be the darks. Okay, this is where this third stage of the darks is going to get some, it's going to introduce our values to the painting. It's going to introduce depth. It's going to introduce form, more interest as well. So it's a really important stage. And it's probably the longest stage, actually, of the whole painting. The drawing and the wash, they're quite short stages. Kenneth, you mentioned at the beginning that you look for a scene with light and dark contrast. Will a scene with mainly lights work okay as well? Say a street at high noon. Yes, it could, but it does have to have some area of contrast in it. I don't have anything. I have done some scenes that are quite light or of a similar value, maybe a rainy day, but there has to be some darks in it. So you've got to introduce some kind of contrast in there. All right. So thanks very much, Kenneth. Right, I'll come back to the questions after the next stage, which is the darks, the shadows. Okay. And I'm going to, plan of attack here is starting from the left-hand side, work my way over the scene, trying to get that lovely triangle of light there on that shot blind. We're coming into the tree, we're painting around the tree. So the tree is still light. We're getting, that's going to create form to the sides of the canopy. And then over the right-hand side, and as I've completed the right-hand side, I come down, and then we'll do the random shapes in the cafe there. This lovely radial pattern of shadows emanating from stuff on the right-hand side. And then I'll come over to the left-hand side, and we'll do the left-hand canopy of the tree coming over the top left corner, and then kind of caressing the left-hand side, and then the shadow in the foreground and these couple of figures. Now, these figures will go into the darkness of the building in the background. Because I started that first, that's going to be, fingers crossed, dry before I do that. If I painted these two together too soon, the figures might bleed into the background building. So I don't want that to happen. All right, for this stage, medium-sized mop brush. This is, to be precise, this is a Jackson's. I don't know whether you can read that. This is a Jackson's, a UK make, pure squirrel mop, but lots of people do these squirrel mops. What I said, there's Rosemary, there's Da Vinci, Isabey. There's lots of makes of this. These quill, these squirrel mops. So good water retaining capability, not too big, good point to it. Do you see that point there? And with my palette, it's only got three sides. These little painting, where the paint is, it's got an open side. So most of the time I'm mixing by drawing the brush from left to right. So I'm not damaging the point. If you've got some deep wells and you're kind of going in a circular pattern to eke out the last bit of paint in your palette, the danger is that you're going to damage that point there. Okay, all right, so that's the first thing. Now, this building, Well, actually looking at the photograph, it starts quite dark, then it gets a little bit lighter, then it gets darker again and cooler as well. So darker, a little bit lighter, and darker again, but cooler, bluer, all right? Don't worry too much about details of reflections on the window. If you look at it too closely, there's lots of little reflections that are coming off the street, and we can see actually in this window here, you can actually see the blind of the building on the behind us where we would be standing. There's another kind of shop over there where the blind is reflecting this window here, but don't worry about that. So let's go in quite dark here, bit of bright red, burnt sienna, bit of neutral tint. I'm trying to resist using the neutral tint there because that can be quite dark. So we'll see how we get on with this first of all. Now, but I don't need to be too precise in following the gutter, the edge of the roof. It's an old building, so don't need to be too precise there. Actually, I will pick up a little bit of neutral tint because I do need to be quite dark as I come over these potted geraniums on the balcony there. There we are. Maybe just a hint of a light hitting the top of the balcony, the railings. And now a little bit lighter as we come down. A little bit lighter as we come down. I'm actually going into those geraniums there because the light's coming from the right-hand side. So I'm just taking up that shadow into the flowers. Come a little bit lighter. I'll actually go over to do this cafe as well. Just cut around little bits of the tree there. On the top of the blind, and then the blind itself. And the edge of the blind. Try and be a little bit careful with that. This is all wet still up here, so I can still work at it. Down to street level now. So we want to get cooler, darker, bit of neutral tint, alizarin crimson, ultramarine blue. I'm mixing in my warm area, but it doesn't matter. And I can go over these figures. And then underneath the blind here, bit of careful painting around this figure. Like that, and then a bit darker as we come down to the street level, and a little bit more random with the shadows as well. Figure here, table, just very, with this good edge on that brush, I can actually draw on these tables and legs quite easily. Right. The right-hand edge of the cafe, there's a sort of bit that we can just about see going up the street. So there's a sort of side street going up there. Now let's go over to this right-hand building. And then, like I did with the other building, go a little bit lighter in the middle. There's a sort of statue, little raised plinth here. So just indicate that there. Let's go a little bit darker now for the tree. Now, I'm still using the mop brush. I'm trying to get in now the darker elements of the tree. So we've got the sort of the periphery, that the side of the tree lighter, but in the middle where it's denser, it's a little bit darker. So a dark green for this, mop brush. Not too dark. And then just leave the edges a little bit lighter. And the middle of the tree a bit darker. And then as we come down, we're sort of going a lot darker still. And now merging into these random shadows. Honestly, we need to just go random, think about random shapes here. Have a bit of fun. Some horizontals, some verticals, something a little bit of an angle. There are a few little raised planters. Now, this radial pattern of shadows, alizarin crimson, ultramarine blue, but just an interesting shadow. Don't make it too grey, okay? Not too much paint on the brush. And drag over, maybe a bit bluer, a bit of cobalt blue. We're dragging it over, almost touching the left-hand side here. So that's the tree. So almost in one. Do the those foreground shadows. So you do see there's sort of, only just have a few more little light ones there, more horizontal. This is still damp up here. It's actually doing quite nicely with the sort of little tiny bits of blooms forming, which I quite like, but I want to go and add a little bit darker up in the, just underneath the rooftop. And while it is a little bit damp up there, do that. There's the top bit of the some sort of solar panel installation up there. There's some tiles on the rooftop. Now, if you look at them, like the radial pattern of the shadows here, they sort of go from the ridge, they sort of just come out a little bit like this. I'm just using the edge of the mop brush. Find the more you do roof tiles, you might begin to get a little bit too overworked with it, and so keep it fairly simple. This chimney, put a chimney on that left building. I'll get a tree in there in a minute. Bit of darkness underneath that blind, and a bit more darkness over there. So just around here, this is starting to dry quite nicely. Now, so I'm just looking over the scene. Yeah, I think we've got the tree quite nice there. You can use your fingertips to get some softer edges. All right. Tree in the distance. There's a tree here. Let me just get back to the photo. This tree here is what I'm talking about. So this is one way of doing middle to distant trees with any old sort of smaller synthetic brush. Don't necessarily need a point, but we're going to abuse this brush. We're going to basically here, fairly dry, all right? Fairly dry, not too much water. We want dry brush marks, not too bright a green, quite a bluey green. And do you see there? Well, actually, I need to do it a bit more. It's almost looking like a chimney sweep's brush now, but that's quite dry. So just test it a little bit and we want to, the tree shape here is fairly sort of conical. So now in a sort of radial pattern again. There, a background tree. Don't overwork it though. And also make sure in the canopy that you sort of closed up all the little bits of sky showing through, but there's little bits of sky showing around the edges of the tree. Yeah, that's the background tree. All right. Now, we're going to be doing now the top left corner, these foreground trees, and we're going to come down. Where I think we got to was completing most of the darks, okay? And now we're going to do the trees. And I was talking about the dagger brush for doing this, for the foliage effect. So we did one foliage effect was the dry brush marks on the background tree there. Next one now for closer foliage, this dagger brush. So I'm going to make this brush actually quite damp, quite a lot of water in there. And then with the brush, pick up a bit of neutral tint. It's going to be quite dark and a little bit of yellow and neutral tint, all right? Mix up something quite dark. There we go. Okay. Right, so everyone should be back. Yeah, it might have been just me, Ceci. So the technique here is almost a 45-degree angle. 45-degree angle. I'm just touching the paper, and do you see it's making sort of leaf type marks. So I'm going to do the leaves first, and then I might do some interconnecting branches. Just continue over the top of the scene, and now I'll come down a little bit denser up in the top left corner, having a few little bits of sky showing through. Now, maybe there are a few little branches. Like that, just a few little whippy branches. There we are. So maybe just a few little leaves right on the edge of the canopy, because we want the sunlight is coming in that sort of direction, right? Now back to my medium-sized brush, okay, and mix up something dark. Bit of alizarin crimson, ultramarine blue, neutral tint, and connect up while sorting out the internet problems. I managed to just keep this just a little bit dry with a nice bit of light there. That could be something. And this little raised island, bring it round. Bit of yellow to show that it's maybe a little bit of foliage or grass or something, and then quite dark as we come round the the near side here. There. Now, two figures, quite dark. Not so wet on the brush here, because I do want a good edge and a good point to the brush. And I'll start with the heads. And then body. And join with the shadows below. That's the first figure. And then this person's friend. Body. Maybe have this one at a slightly sort of jaunty angle. Like that. Okay, so they are darker against the slightly lighter background. So let me just answer any questions you got. So I'm going to let that dry a bit. So the last stage is going to go in with the detail of some of the architectural elements, windows, balcony, the lines on the shop blind as well, maybe a few more lines on the rooftops, but just some detail work. So let me answer any questions you've got. Flavia, are you painting the figure sitting on the right? I can't see the right side of your drawing quite well. So there were some figures here, but I've moved them over. Okay, I'm going to have quite a light figure there. Hoyami, in terms of composition, why did you include the two people on the left to draw viewers' attention to the focal point, two people at the table? Aren't they rather distractive? The building behind the left, two figures are going to be dark or for the best. I think reserve judgment till the end. It seemed to work on my practice painting. So these two figures sort of looking in, creating an element of a story in the composition. So reserve judgment till the end. All right. Linda, your paper always seems so wet. Living in Mexico washes dry so quickly. It's down to the humidity. Actually, it's quite a warm day here in the UK. So it is drying quite quickly, but while we're offline, some of this is still quite damp. I can feel it now. I could still be working that with some paint, and I would still get a little bit of a soft edge, Linda. So yes, in a hot climate, your humidity could be, I don't know, 10%, 20%. Today here in the UK, maybe humidity is 40, 50. It rained yesterday, so that's got to have some element to it in the temperature of your room. There's lots of elements to that. Richard, you've got shimmering effects in the bottom. Is this not due to the fact that I use rough paper? It could be, Richard. Yes, exactly. Question from Anya, how do you decide to scale of your figures? Well, I've got to have figures of different sizes. So maybe smaller in the distance, these foreground figures, trying to keep though if you've got more than one figure, trying to keep the levels of the heads similar, sort of almost in a horizontal line, all right? So be careful with, if you've got more figures, not to have them too high or too low. Try and keep them level, horizontal, the tops of their heads. Ravi, what's the size of the paper? This is 15 inches by 11 inches, or about 37 centimeters by 27 centimeters. Kenneth, is the initial wash still visible under the second darker layer? Yes, it is a little bit. With these transparent layers of watercolor, an element of what I did below will shine through the darker bits. So, for example, I with this building, I kept that fairly warm and light, that sort of color. All right, so it is going to shine through a little bit. Question from Alex. Tim, do you have anything against using a hairdryer to accelerate the drying of your paper? No, I don't. In fact, under my drawing board, I do have a hairdryer here just in case. But because I've got a Q&A session here running in between the elements of the painting process, I don't need to speed up the drying. And then I've got lots of questions about me disconnecting. Don't know what the problem is. Today, there is going on in the UK an online, because of the pandemic, the Hayes Festival. There's a Hay Festival, which is a big reading festival, and they're using the crowdcast system. And Stephen Fry is giving an interview right now. So I'm not sure whether that's got anything to do with my disconnection. Anyway, we're on now. Carrying on. Okay. So, Alison, I'm so surprised how very opaquely you use the watercolor. It just takes a bit of practice. And Dave, does cotton paper stay wetter longer than less expensive paper? Yes, definitely. If you had wood pulp based paper, that would dry quicker. The cotton based paper, this is still damp. If I feel with my fingertips here, it's still damp. This is taking a long time to dry. Maybe in Mexico, not so quickly. All right. Detail stage. So, smaller brush, thicker paint. Okay. And darker color as well. I don't really have to pick up any water for my brush. I'm just picking up anything that's in the palette and fairly dark. So let me just think now, what have I got to do? Well, a little bit of tiling for that building there. Perhaps there's some railings or something on the top of this building over here. There's some aerials as well. There's some vertical drain pipes on the buildings. There's the very important stripes. Now these stripes, the angle of them is going to change as we traverse, as we go down the shop line. So they're going to be more vertical this side, and then they're going to go a deeper angle as we go down to the right, and then we've got the bits coming down vertically. Okay, so it's starting to take shape now. Maybe a few little lines here, top and bottom. A few open doorways of the bar. be careful to preserve some of these lighter areas. They could be just little bits and pieces catching the light. Some upper story windows. Now with these windows, sometimes it's a good idea not to make them perfect rectangles. So this one is just hidden behind that tree there. A few darker lines underneath the rooftop there. Balcony of this building. Now with the railings, don't include them all. Just a few of them. There, and the shop window here behind the two guys. So my brush now is actually quite dry. Little light bits, we can make them into something. So there's a little bit of a light bit there. If you look on the source photo, there's something, maybe it's some sort of motor or something to do with a shop blind, but we can just put something underneath these lighter bits and make them into an object. A few more aerials. Coming down into the cafe region, let's give this figure a face and arms. So there's a little bit of a focal point there. Perhaps there should be a tiny bit of shadow on that figure, like that. I'm not going to put, I think if I started doing too much detail with the cafe there, then it's going to detract from the freshness of it. So I'm just going to put in a few little lines here and there. There's a sort of bit of a platform to the cafe. Now there are some lines on the street here, which might be a good idea to have a few of them in the picture. Like that, just a few, not complete lines, a bit of lost and found there. Right. Perhaps in the canopy of the tree, using the same brush, we might better see a few little branches just to give the impression of a tree, and we can just sneak through and we see a few little branches through the canopy. But I don't want to get too detailed at this stage, or this start of this end bit of the painting, because I'm going to lose that sort of freshness of it. Over on the right hand side, perhaps some details on that right hand building. Okay. Now, next, or the last step. Let me just see if there's any more questions before I go to the very last step. Question from John. Seems like a great deal of how watercolor works is based on relative wetness of paper, brush, and pigment load. Does this only come with practice, or is there some reference articles from which to learn? I just learned it from practicing, John. Not necessarily doing exercises, but just doing a lot of paintings, and it becomes intuition eventually, picking up the water and adding it to your pigment and then mixing it, and you just pick up a sort of sense of how thick the paper is on your brush, and you then instinctively know when you go onto the paper, you just know how it's going to perform. Okay, so it does come with practice. Thank you very much, John. And drawing talk, John, when do you simplify the scene? What do you think is the most important, and what is a good way to simplify? Maybe with a photograph, look at a very small size of the photograph, like a thumbnail or a low resolution, or even squint your eyes just to see if that helps too, so that you don't see the detail. Think about elements that can be moved around. So street lamps, people, tables and chairs, bollards, cars, they can all be moved around to suit the composition. Avoid, as I've said before, avoid having things on the edges of your painting, John. All right, what I'm going to do now is add in a few little highlights with some white paint. So same brush with a good point, and just found a question there. So tube, straight out the tube, a little bit of white paint, could be white gouache or titanium white. And with this, we just want to pick up a few highlights here and there, maybe a few railings. Not too many, because that is in the dark. We don't want that too bright. These figures here, just a few little highlights on there. Tabletop figure. And you can make figures as well. You can make a figure with sort of three marks. There could be someone standing underneath the shade of the canopy here. So we could have a head and then two shoulders. All right, so someone just almost coming out from the shadows there. Be careful with the white, don't overdo it. A bit of a no-no is using it for frames of windows, so I'm being very sparingly these surroundings of those windows. These flowers, though, I think they need a little bit of a highlight on the sides. That is pretty much it. So, just to recap, a sunny scene could be anywhere. A fairly ordinary scene, probably a scene that many people would just dismiss, but trying to change elements of the composition and trying to remove things as well. So the most obvious thing I removed was the parasol there, the folded parasol. I included something on the left-hand side. So we've got a little bit of trees overhanging here. I've moved that over on the left-hand side. Looking for things that attract you to the scene. For me, a silly little thing, that little triangle of light hitting the canopy. I hope I've been able to preserve that there with that. Contre jour, looking into the canopy of the tree. Interesting shadow shapes, accentuating perspective and drawing the viewer's eye into the scene. Thinking about focal points. Could it be a figure? Could it be a couple of focal points? Maybe creating an element of a story in the composition as well. Maybe these two people are talking with each other. Maybe they're talking about these people. I don't know, but trying to create an element of a story in there. But simplifying the scene, trying to keep things loose. So let me I did spot Raquel's question. I still don't understand how to determine the size of figures. Let me just start answering that. I still don't understand how to determine the size of figures. Understand the heads on the horizontal, but how far down for the feet to go? Okay, now, as regards to the size of figures, use a reference point. For example, the height of a window, the height of the doorway. So this door in the cafe, thinking about the height of a figure and then coming down to street level, thinking about how far in the distance that person is. But practice your figure work. And as I explained at the beginning, if you want the figure to be your focal point, then maybe put the figures in first and draw the architectural details around them. But look at some point of relationship of the size of the figure. So the height of the doorway, the height of a car, the height of some railings or a fence. They could be your clues about where to start the head and where to end the body. All right, I don't think there's any more questions coming through. So I do apologize for the halt in the transmission 2/3 of the way through there. I hope it didn't unduly spoil your enjoyment and the whole process here. But hopefully everyone, you enjoyed that. So please send me a photo of your painting. Please, can you do that in the next 2 weeks? So that's going to be, let me see. So today is the 24th. Can you please get all your paintings to me by the 7th of June? And if you email me, timothy@gmail.com, all right? timothy@gmail.com. And it'd be great to hear about any challenges you had with the painting as well. You don't need to copy this style. If you want to do your own thing, that's quite all right by me. It's lovely to see everyone's different style, everyone's different take on things, all right? So the URL for the recording, hopefully it will be the same. I'm going to make sure with the hiccup in the transmission that the recording maintain its integrity and it all kind of sellotape together. So bear with me on that. The recording may not be available for a little bit of time yet. The system's got to process things a bit more. But I hope you enjoy the experience. Next session will be late June. I'm going to do a beach scene from the UK. All right. So if you are into waves, beach, again, we're going to talk about watercolor. This is a UK scene down in Cornwall. All right. So we want some soft waves. We're going to be doing wet in wet, graded washes, dry brush marks as well. So beach scene for late June. I'll open out the registration sometime next week, but hope to have you all on the call. Thanks very much for everyone attending live. Those listening to recording, please send in your pictures. Please send in a photo of your picture. Love to include, and hope to see you on the June workshop where we'll be doing a sunny beach scene. Thanks very much indeed.